Welcome to the Path Forward podcast. I'm your host, Augie Ghilarducci, and what we're doing today is moving forward in a series where we talk to people that have some lived experience that's really relevant to those that are on the inside, because that's a large segment of those that listen to us are currently incarcerated. And what I'd like to do is introduce my guest, David Whitesock. David, thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know that we met through a mutual friend. You and I had a couple of Zoom calls. I heard your story and practically begged you to say, will you come on and be a guest on the podcast to share your story? So thank you for being here.
Well, you're welcome. And I really appreciate the invitation. I've watched a few episodes leading up to this. And I look forward to just adding what experience and wisdom I have gained over the years.
Let me start by asking, as we always do, tell us a little bit about, growing up, maybe the part of the country and what you did as a young man, what you enjoyed doing, whether it was sports or school or those types of things.
Yeah, I grew up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. I was the son of two individuals that were in the Air Force. My mother left the Air Force and worked as a civil servant in the military, while my dad stayed enlisted through the 70s, 80s. So we were based in Grand Forks. I really kind of wanted to do two things growing up. I wanted to play a lot of baseball, which I did. And as I started to think about what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was the mid 80s. So I wanted to be a fighter pilot because Top Gun was on, even though we lived on a air base that was for missiles. And my dad was in the missiles for the Air Force. And so I wanted to be a fighter pilot. That's what I was really kind of eyeballing. But baseball was really kind of like my attention grabber. I think I got relatively good at it. And as I got older and got into high school, I found golf. That became a secondary sport and actually replaced baseball as I got older.
I have to ask you, do you still golf?
I do still golf, yeah.
You able to find
I
time in your
love
schedule
it.
to do it regularly?
No, I don't. I maybe play twice a year at this point, but that's just the nature of operating a business. And I know when I do get a chance to get out, I relish it. I relish every minute of it.
So at some point in your life, from playing baseball and then golf and thinking about being a fighter pilot, at some point you, as they say, you got on the wrong path. Would you mind sharing some of that with us?
Yeah, I was a kid in grade school and in high school that was, scrawny. I was, in the movie Rudy, 5 foot nothing, 100 nothing. I got picked on pretty readily. I was an outsider because I moved from the air base to a small rural North Dakota town. My parents had gotten divorced in the middle of there. And so my mom moved to this small town and I didn't really fit in very well. And so I kind of always never really fit, even though I was in sports and I kind of had that. What started to transpire in high school was just wanting to be part of the crowd. Up until my junior year, didn't do the things my high school friends did. I didn't sneak out. I didn't do drugs. I didn't drink alcohol. I didn't smoke. But one night out after a football game, sitting in my pickup truck out in a field, I tried beer for the first time. And turns out I really loved it. Not just because the beer was great, but because I could talk to my friends. I could feel social. I could go across the fire pit and talk to a girl. And it changed my whole outlook on things. Unfortunately, as I've come to realize, I didn't have an off switch with alcohol. I didn't really know how to control it. And so after graduation and then getting into college, I went to North Dakota State University, actually enrolled in the architecture program. That was another side thing that I found I was good at, was drawing. And alcohol just kind of took over. I stopped going to classes, picked up a DUI, and everything just kind of snowballed from there. Getting kicked out of college and trying it a couple of times over. But yeah, that was my introduction into the slide of things not going well.
I have to ask that when that was going on, were you reflecting back to say that how did I get here? Because for so long I wasn't involved in anything except school and sports and that type of thing. Did any of that take place, or you're just living in the moment?
It's a good question, but no, I was just living in the moment. I was just in survival mode. It was, what can I do next? I think being in that headspace of just living in the moment allowed for the kind of next interregnum to happen. Um, while I was failing out of college a couple of times, kind of looking for my place, I got a phone call from a high school classmate of mine. I'm now, 20 years old. And this high school classmate called and said, "Hey, we need some folks for our radio station. Would you like a job?" Grand Forks, North Dakota, is positioned on the Red River, and the Red River floods a lot. And this time around, 1997, it had a 100 or 500 year flood. It destroyed the town, and a lot of the people that worked at the radio station, which was just on the outside of town, couldn't make it to the station. But I lived just outside by that radio station. So Paul called me and said, "We need somebody to be on the air from midnight to 6 and read all the notices for where do they get sandbags and what have you. Can you help?" And I said, "Sure." Knowing I wasn't very good at public speaking and I hated it. But if Paul could do it, I could do it. Plus, it was a paycheck. And so that turned into a 10-year career of being on
Really?
the radio. Yeah. But my addiction didn't leave me just because I got a job. In fact, it made it worse because now I'm out in the public. A lot of our advertisers and sponsors were restaurants and bars. So what am I doing on a Thursday night? I'm doing live shots from a bar. I got very good at doing play-by-play sports, a lot of hockey. And so you'd finish a game, and what would you do? You'd go to the bar, hang out with the parents and the coaches, and it'd be 2, 3 in the morning, and you'd do it all over again. And so that was my life for about 8 years. And through the course of that, picked up 4 DUIs.
And at some point, those DUIs converted into time incarcerated.
Yeah, the way it kind of came down was I was driving the company vehicle. So it had the big radio station letters on the side. I drove home, passed out, got arrested for my 4th DUI, was fired from my job. I spun around for about 12 to 18 months living in my parents' basement. I had taught myself web design, so I built a web design business, again, just out of survival, and made a bunch of money real quick. Started doing podcasting in 2004. So everybody's podcasting today, but in the throes of all of this, I was one of the first people in the world podcasting. The New York Times came to my home, did a story on the front page of the technology section of the Sunday New York Times in 2005. I kind of had the world ready for me, but I didn't know how to deal with it because I was drunk and blacked out most of the time. And ended up getting kicked out of the house by my parents because it was really bad. Found my way to a radio station in Winter, South Dakota. It's a speck on the map in the middle of Rosebud and Pine Ridge Indian reservations. And I was there 3 months and got my 5th DUI and was thrown in jail. And that was the point where I was faced with serious incarceration and had to do 6 months in the county jail, but had 2 years of prison suspended unless I made some serious changes.
And that became the motivator?
Slowly. I think what became the motivator was the judge saying to me during my sentencing, at least looking back on it now, the judge, and this is 2005, the judge didn't have much in terms of helping me. She could incarcerate me. She could send me to treatment, which I had done many times, but that was it. Although she had a new tool, and that tool was twice daily breathalyzers. So it was a new program called 24/7 sobriety program. It was invented in the state of South Dakota. I was one of the first people put on it because there I was with a fifth DUI, being sentenced for a felony. I was a menace to society. And the judge basically said, and here was the motivator in open court. She's like, I don't know where we went wrong. How did we fail you? I'm going to put you in my jail for a while. I'm going to make you think about things. And if you have a plan for how to spend the next year of your life outside of jail that isn't BS, and you can maintain going to an AA meeting every day, and you can do this breathalyzer every single day, I think if I can keep you sober long enough, you'll figure it out. You're smart. You've got your wits of you. You've got some resources. That was kind of the motivator. It was somebody who was not my family, who didn't really know me, kind of looking at me and going, there's something here, but I've got to put some discipline in your life. So you're going to get up at 7, go to the jail, blow into a tube, go rebuild your life. End of the day, go back to that jail, blow into the tube, and repeat until you figure it out. And slowly but surely that discipline and regard for a process, not knowing where I was going to go. I couldn't set any big goals yet. I had no idea what was going to happen, but just keeping that process in place opened up opportunities that I couldn't have imagined.
So at this point, approximately how old were you at this point?
I was 29.
29, okay. And at 29, you had the experience of being in college and then worked in a radio station, did some sports broadcasting, right? Then when you were uninvited from continuing with the radio station, you figured out some things with web design and you did some podcasting. So obviously you're very industrious, being able to figure out some next moves that are productive and certainly brought a paycheck and some experience, and sounds like being in the radio business might have been fun for a while too. So but so here you stand, you've just gone through all this, the judge has put faith in you to figure it all out, but you had to be on a strict regimen. So now what happens? How do things turn that have us talking today?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. While I was in jail, I had that 6 months I was a trustee. I had a little bit of freedom in jail. This is a jail in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. So it was being rebuilt at the time. So us trustees lived in the basement, and we had this entire basement of couches and chairs and TVs and alarm clocks. And so we had a little bit of freedom and a phone, direct access to a phone. And what got the point that allows us to get to where we are today was while I was in treatment at the State Health and Human Services Center, I had met a counselor who I told him what I needed to do. Didn't know where I was going to go, what I was going to do. And he said, they just opened this sober home in Sioux Falls. I said, what is a sober home? And he explained it to me. And I said, that sounds like something I'd like to do. And he said, great, call Tom A. Call him every day. Tell him you want in. Because the judge would let me out of jail early if I had a good plan. And so we took that back to the judge, and I kept calling Tom every morning. I'd go make breakfast, call Tom. Go make breakfast, call Tom. Finally, one day, Tom said...
Was he answering the phone? Were you speaking with him, building a little rapport, or was it just leaving messages?
No, he was answering the phone every morning. He ran the sober home. What I didn't know is that the person that saved his life would eventually save mine a little bit. So one day he picked up the phone and he goes, David, you're in luck. A guy left us. We'll hold the room for 10 days. So we went to the judge, got a hearing, and the judge said, great. I moved into the house. On the second day, I met Tom right away, but on the second day, I met a man named Kevin Kirby. Kevin started that sober home. Kevin's a serial entrepreneur, kind of knows everybody in the town. His family has been a stalwart pillar of that community for decades. And it just turns out that Kevin would be the guy that would introduce me to some pathways that would navigate me out of my problems. He knew the general manager of the radio station, so I could get a part-time job. He would take me to AA meetings. He would introduce me to other people in the community, people I would have no business getting to know. The president of the Chamber of Commerce, the people that ran the Rotary Club, people that I just had no intersection with in my previous life. And finally, one day somebody said, you should probably just go back to college. That would be the best thing for you. Keep your nose clean, go back to school, get a degree. How can I help you do that? And eventually that person putting that bug in my ear led me to then going back to school as a 29-year-old while on probation, doing twice daily breathalyzers, trying to figure out a new way out.
And you had acquired a mentor along the way that was even a little more than a mentor if he's opening these doors for you, which is one of the really wonderful things that I've experienced since I released from prison, is that, we meet people and we have no idea where those relationships can go, and doors get opened and we just walk through. And after a while, I think we become fearless about walking through the doors because there's generally something good that can happen.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I would say to anybody who's watching or listening to this is, and I didn't really fully appreciate this at the time, but one of my requirements while being on probation was I had to do regular counseling. And so because I went to college at the University of South Dakota, the Student Counseling Center was free. And my therapist, in one of our first few meetings, she just said to me, the thing that's going to change your life is not anything that you actually do. It's actually how you receive information. I said, what does that mean, Deb? And she says, you need to be on the scan for positive opportunity, always. It might not look like anything special. I'm like, okay, I'll just remember that. Skip ahead. One of the electives that I was taking as a class was constitutional law. I just had to fill my schedule. The professor was a public defender, 30 years old. She saw me give a mock Supreme Court argument, forced me onto her mock trial team, and didn't know any of my background, just knew that I was good on my feet and I could give an argument. And so we go to a competition. I'm older than everybody else, so we're sitting at Culver's having a butter burger, and she asks, why are you here? What are you doing? I tell her everything. And she says, wow, that's amazing. But because I was going back into journalism. And she said, no offense to the journalists, we need them, but what a waste. You need to become a lawyer. And I said, Sandy, I'm a convicted felon on probation for the next 4 years. Nobody in my family's ever gone to college, let alone get a terminal degree like a Juris Doctorate. What are you talking about? And she said, we'll figure it out. I'll go with you every year to a sentencing hearing. I'll tell the judge, on your behalf, explain that you're doing well. We'll get you into law school. Sure enough, I'd graduate and get into law school and graduate law school and pass the bar exam. And 8 years after being sentenced in that courtroom in South Dakota, got to go back to the same courtroom, same judge, and that judge would swear me in as a lawyer in the state of South Dakota.
That's really cool. That's a great story. Yeah. So let's now move to the entrepreneurial side, and because you started to do some things that ultimately resulted in what you're doing now and how you and I met. So what was that like, as far as how did that evolve after you've become a lawyer and you've gone through all these other experiences? What came next?
Well, after I graduated and I take the bar exam and passed, the one interesting thing about that is because I did have that felony conviction on my record, I had to go through a character and fitness hearing. So I had to prove that I had the good moral character to be a lawyer. That took a year. But in
Wow.
the course of that time, I had student loans piled up. So I needed a job. One of the last people on my list to try to find a job was Kevin Kirby, the guy who was my mentor in the sober home. I knew that he had started what's called a recovery community organization in Sioux Falls. And I said, "Hey, Kevin, can you help?" Wasn't expecting to go work for him. I was just, everybody, can you help? And we exchanged some emails, and a couple weeks later, I'm now working for this nonprofit in Sioux Falls that's doing peer coaching. And in the course of that work, the problem that we had in doing that work was we couldn't explain to our donors the success of the people. So I've told my recovery story, but how do you put that into data? Well, that job fell to me. And so I basically had a blank check to figure that out. And what came out of that was the Recovery Capital Index. And so that solved a problem to measure recovery for our organization. But over the course of validating that 5 years later, we had a county call us to say that they wanted to use it and license it. And we originally rejected it, but our organization was filled with entrepreneurs. And so they said, "Hey, let's explore it. Let's do it. What are we going to lose?" So that was 2019. We licensed it. I went down to Florida. We launched it in February of 2020. COVID hit. I was the highest paid person at our organization, the nonprofit. And I turned to the board and said, "I built you the ability along with a bunch of other people to do peer coaching digitally and around the world. You don't need me anymore. I'd like to go explore turning the Recovery Capital Index into a business. And if I do it well and do it right, it will be a sustainable revenue source for you. Face it together." So that was May of 2020. I left and Commonly Well was created. And skip ahead, that's how we meet because our paths cross in the course of just the places that we're working in criminal justice and in addiction recovery.
So can we dig in on the Recovery Capital Index and kind of explain how that works? And there's many people that are watching this or listening to this on the inside that they're incarcerated because of a drug-related crime, and many, I think, are sorting out, I don't want to come back down this path. When this is over, I want to find a way to move forward and do exciting things and, figure out my life. And so what is the Recovery Capital Index, and how would it work for people that are thinking along those terms?
Yeah. So you're sitting there in jail, you're incarcerated now, and you're looking at your life and going, what do I have? It looks like you don't have a lot. Although some people are building up skills and capabilities to do other things, and that's wonderful. Keep doing that. But what the RCI does is, in a lot of the world where addiction and recovery exists, there's really only one marker of success that most people follow, and that is sober, not sober, clean, not clean. And that's fine, but that doesn't tell the whole story. So as you kind of heard in my story, was there are a bunch of other areas of life that matter. So you use the word industrious. I didn't really know that about myself until you clear the fog a little bit and realize, oh, yeah, I am kind of industrious. Okay, what else do I have going for me? Well, the Recovery Capital Index is a defined inventory of a person's life. So we break it up into three categories. There's personal capital. That is what are you good at? What employment do you have? What financial resources do you have? Can you get from A to B? Now, obviously, if you're incarcerated, that's not going to matter. But when you get out, how will you get from where you live to where you need to go? your probation officer, parole officer, to work. Well, for me, I moved to a new town. Frankly, I'd never gotten in a bus before. So I had to figure out the bus system in a place I didn't know, right? It's not a far cry for any other people listening to this, but that was new to me. So my recovery capital and transportation was nothing. I had no car. I had a bike and a bus system I had to learn. Okay. That's personal capital. But we can measure all that because we can rank it, right? Social capital. Who are my friends? What are the intensity of my family relationships? How do those fit in helping me? Do they want to help me? Are they engaged in my life? And then cultural capital is the other stuff like faith, spirituality. What's my purpose? Do I know what my values are? How am I connected to this community? And so we score that from 1 to 100. And when we break it out in the parts and the pieces, you start to see what are your assets, where are your assets missing? And then with help, people can help you use your strengths to build up in places where you maybe don't have strengths. And it becomes a tool to sort of help you guide through your next steps.
And you designed all this, and I'm sure it evolved as you were doing the designing, and this is where you broke it into categories and how this would work. And so now I would think that as you continue to do this, you continue to develop more data from people that are doing the recovery capital index, and you can then use that to continue to refine and maybe expand certain things or whatever. Is that somewhat correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's also, the data is coming from people like you and me, Augie, right? It's our own information, and you've got people at various stages of their life. Well, one thing that we have learned, or two things that we've learned, people that are coming out of jail and going through the reentry process, there are two predictive indicators, one for housing stability and one for recidivism or delaying rearrest. So for those listening, if you want to make sure you're still in stable housing after 90 days, make sure you have good, close relationships, one or two. Good social capital, people that you can rely on, somebody who can maybe drive you from point A to point B. That matters. I didn't know I had that, but I had that early on. Number two, the number one predictor for rearrest is feeling unsafe. So we find the people that have a technical violation or commit another crime, those people are people that don't feel safe at home, at work, or in the community. And so safety means something different maybe to all of us, but just feeling comfort, feeling content, feeling okay in where I am, turns out keeps us from going back down that bad path again and making poor decisions.
And so now when we talk about, like, you went to a place in Florida, they wanted to implement this into what they were doing. And this was related to reentry, correct? People that were coming out of incarceration.
That's right.
What was their motivator in your opinion? What was it that said we like this concept? What were they hoping to gain from employing the RCI program or the RCI format with their population?
Getting away from the status quo measurement that has defined people's lives for so long and actually made it worse for people. So if we just define all of our lives by the last worst thing that we did, if I use drugs again or drank again, and that puts me back in jail, or I lose my housing because of it. Those things are so much more disruptive than that one single drinking episode. It's an error. We should fix the error. We should maybe not do that again, but we shouldn't rip away all the progress people are making. And because this particular area was doing that over and over and over again, it was costing them so much money to just return people back into jail, strip people from housing. and they just woke up and they're like, what's a better way? How can we mitigate against that risk? And it was just giving people additional resources, the right resources to kind of keep people moving forward. Progress, not perfection.
So as you look ahead 5 years with what you're doing now, and where you've got a footprint with the program. I mean, it's out there. And how many facilities are you in right now?
Probably operating in about 350 facilities around the country.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so when you look out 5 years professionally, what do you see? What's the next step with this?
Yeah, we are trying to become the Gallup for addiction. We want to be the place where everybody goes for that insight and information on a regular, real time basis that says how people are doing relative to mental health and addiction. And we want to have a map that says where are the strengths, where are the deficits. And anybody, so if I'm sitting in jail somewhere and I don't know what the deal is, but somebody cares about me, they could go turn to this map and we could be in Chicago, Illinois, and go, okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses in Chicago? All right, what are the strengths and weaknesses of John Doe? They align or don't align. How can we make this work for John? And it might not be that you move to Chicago. It might be that you go live somewhere else for the better opportunity, but only if we have a good map of information can we tell that for people. Can we bring that hope to people? In 5 years, I hope that we have enough information that allows people that know how to design solutions, can create better systems that don't keep people stuck in revolving doors. That we just design better systems for people. Because right now we've designed very poor systems.
And the results show that, right? I mean, when we see the recidivism numbers, when we see the relapse numbers, the results are they're frightening. I mean, to take a look at. And so this sounds like a different approach, and it sounds like it's got some real traction going with it. And I think it logically makes sense with what you're doing and the way that you break things down. And one of the things that I am fond of saying is that the number one rule of reentry is that we have to be willing to ask for help. And if part of what the Recovery Capital Index does is allow us to see where we have some deficiencies, now we know where we have to engage to say, I don't have transportation. I need to ask for help to make that happen. And so I think that, that type of information exposes maybe some weaknesses that we can then address and understand that this is something that I really do need to work on getting solved. I'll humble myself and I'll see if I can find a way to get a bus pass or find a way to, be able to borrow a bicycle or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and sometimes maybe you don't even know, or the people trying to help us. You've asked for help, but you've asked for one particular thing. What the RCI tends to do is it opens up the aperture a little bit to a few things that might be on the edge. You never know, like just little wins, little bits of help can be much bigger and better for you than like a really big help, right? I will just share this one last thing, Augie. We found that people that are coming out of going through reentry and that immediately get a full-time job have a tougher way through than people that start with a part-time job. There's so much going on in life that if they're doing 8 and 12 hours a day, and I know we have to work, we don't have enough time to kind of deal with the rest of stuff in our life. And I didn't know that. I mean, it made sense intuitively, but then when we saw the data, we're like, oh yeah, people need room. They need 5 more hours of their own life to work on because they're overcoming something so dramatic.
Boy, is that great stuff, because when you were starting to tell that, I was thinking so many people, when they release, it's first thing that comes out of their mouth is, I need to get a job. I need to get a job. I need to get a job. And then you said we've got to kind of open our minds to say there might be some other things that we need too. And that's such a great point. I mean, the truth of the matter is there are people that release that are not ready for work or not ready for full-time work. And it becomes a mistake to make that the priority. And unfortunately, my experience in the system is that that's what the system pushes for. Just objectively stating it. It's not a criticism, but when I met my case manager, before they wanted to know my name, they wanted to know if I had a job yet. And so with those type of pressures and the internal pressure, I haven't worked for years, and certainly I don't have financial resources. I need to get a paycheck. But if they can use something to get if an individual can get a broader perspective of the different things they might need, then it becomes obvious. There's plenty of time for me to get a full-time job, but maybe for the next 3 or 6 months, I need to focus on, I'll get a part-time job, and I can focus on some of these other things that I need to get aligned so that I can really move forward and not move forward, 2 steps and then back 3 steps.
That's exactly it. And the last thing I'll add to that, which was a differentiator in my life, was it was a big decision to decide to go back to school. No one was going to help me pay for it. So I was going to have to go get all the loans and the financial aid all myself and do that. And so I reached out to my lawyer, to the judge, to family. My lawyer wrote me back and said, do not do this. In the first year
Really?
Do not do it. The University of South Dakota, USD, stands for the University of Sex and Drugs. You will relapse. Don't do it. Family was like, no, just focus on a little bit of work, staying clean, etc. The judge was the only person who wrote me back and said, I approve of this. You should do it. And so much in society and people around us are telling us don't take risks because of what our life before said about us. But if there's an opportunity before you and you think about it a little bit, I don't know, take the risk. Do it. You only got one shot. And I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't.
This certainly lived up or exceeded expectations. It's a great story. There's so many different things people can pull from this, the little bits of inspiration. The whole reason that we started doing this podcast is to bring hope and inspiration on the inside. As you know, there's some dark days in there, but if you can spend 30 or 40 minutes watching something like this and saying, man, if that guy David could do that, I can go back to school, or I can start my own business, or I can be involved doing other things. And that's what we want, right? We want people to feel like that this is not the end. Being incarcerated is not the end. It's a chapter in a book. There are plenty more chapters that can be written. So thank you so much for your time and what you shared. And I'm very confident this is going to be a popular episode because the message is so real and your delivery is so real in explaining it. I wish you the very best with what you're doing. And you and I are going to continue conversations, and I want to introduce some places that I've been exposed to that I think will be really interested in the work that you're doing. So we'll continue our conversations, and maybe we'll come back and do a follow-up episode sometime down the road and talk about some of the other things that have evolved from the work that you're doing. This is David Whitesock. He's been our guest today. This is the Path Forward podcast. I'm the host, Augie Ghilarducci. This is sponsored by the Second Opportunity Program. And David, thank you for your time. And if there's any parting words you want to leave with our audience, feel free to do so.
I just appreciate everything that you do to get these words to people. I felt alone and didn't have a lot of that when I was in that position. So thank you for doing that. And the last thing I'll say is if anybody reaches out to you, Augie, and they want to get in touch with me, feel free to make the connection. I'll be more than happy to lend a connection where I can.
What's that joke they say? Be careful what you wish for. Every couple of episodes, I will give out our P.O. box, and we get a stack of letters like this every week now. And It's so rewarding. And many of the letters come in and say, hey, you had this guest so-and-so. I've got they have a letter in there to forward on to somebody. And so we can do that. And I've just been handed the piece of paper that says the Path Forward Podcast, P.O. Box 3411, Peachtree City, Georgia, 30269. And as you've heard David's very kind offer, if there's some things that you want to write to him about and pick his brain about, feel free to send them to that address, and I assure you we will forward them on to him.
and I
So,
will
David,
respond.
thank you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the information. Thanks for your story. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Augie.